I wish I could tell you my marriage was flawless. That after 12 years, Lena and I were still that irritatingly perfect couple everyone envies, like something out of a romantic comedy. The kind of couple that makes you believe in soulmates and happily ever afters. Maybe that's what it looked like from the outside. 2 kids, a nice home, Sunday family dinners. But anyone who's been married long enough knows things are rarely as straightforward as they seem. And things can change quicker than you'd think. For me, it started with little things, almost like whispers, so faint you could easily dismiss them as nothing. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I wasn't the jealous type, and I trusted Lena. At least I used to. But damn, she started transforming right in front of me. Lena was always someone of habit. She had her routines. Monday was Pilates, Wednesday was book club, and Friday nights were ours, movie nights after the kids went to bed. But then those routines started shifting. She'd go out more, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, always with some ready excuse. She'd say, "Oh, I'm meeting the girls from yoga," or "We're doing a late-night gym session." And I wanted to believe her, I really did. But there was something in her eyes, a mix of excitement or maybe guilt, that made it hard to ignore. I'll never forget the time she came home from one of those nights with her friends. She walked through the door, and it was like a completely different woman had entered. She had this satisfied look on her face, like she'd just experienced something amazing. All I could think was, what did I miss? She became distant, cold, barely saying a word to me or the kids. If I asked about her night, she'd just shrug and say, "It was fine," then head straight for the shower, locking herself in the bathroom for what felt like forever. I've never been one to snoop, but in those moments, the paranoia crept in like an itch I couldn't scratch. And her phone? Oh man, don't get me started on that. It was practically glued to her hand, like it held the key to some big secret. Even when she was cooking dinner, that phone would be sitting on the counter, screen down, buzzing every few minutes. I knew something was off. One day, she got a message, and her entire expression changed, like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. She deleted it so fast I barely had time to react. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but she just laughed it off. "Oh, no one. Just spam," she said, her voice a little too high-pitched, a little too forced. But I let it go for that night at least. I know what you're thinking. If I was so suspicious, why didn't I confront her? But you have to understand, when you've been with someone for that long, it's hard to just turn on them and assume the worst. Lena and I had history, good history. We weren't just married. We were partners, best friends. Or at least, that's what I thought. So, I did what any loving husband would do to try and save his marriage. I decided to fix it. I figured maybe we were just in a rut. Maybe she was stressed from work. Maybe it was one of those phases couples go through. So, I planned a surprise getaway. Just the 2 of us. I even called her boss to clear her schedule for a Friday off, booked a cabin in the mountains, and arranged a babysitter for the kids. I was excited, ready to reignite whatever spark had gone dim. But when I told her, she didn't look happy, surprised, or anything close to what I'd hoped for. Instead, she just looked annoyed. "I can't," she said, barely making eye contact. "Work's crazy right now. I have to be in the office all weekend." My heart sank. It wasn't just her words. It was how easily they came out, like she didn't even have to think about the lie. She didn't even pretend to be disappointed. That night, I sat on the couch after she went to bed, staring at the blank TV screen, my mind racing. I replayed our entire marriage in my head, trying to figure out when things started to go wrong. And the worst part? I couldn't pinpoint it. All I knew was that the woman I thought I would spend my life with was slipping away, and I had no idea how to bring her back. By then, things between us were tense. She'd get defensive over the smallest things. If I asked what time she'd be home, she'd snap, "Why do you need to control every second of my life?" We started fighting more, no longer the usual petty bickering about who left the dishes out or forgot to pick up the dry cleaning. These were full-blown arguments, with yelling and slammed doors. And every time, I'd sit there afterward feeling like the bad guy, wondering if I was just losing my mind. The worst part about suspicion is that it's like a poison. It slowly spreads into everything you do. The more I let it consume me, the more I felt like a stranger in my own life. Every good morning felt fake. Every kiss good night felt forced. I tried to hold it together, but it was like trying to stop an avalanche. Eventually, I cracked, but not the way you might expect. One night, I just sat there, watching Lena scroll through her phone, that same sly smile playing on her lips, and I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to talk to someone who could give me the truth. No sugarcoating, no nonsense. So I called Rachel. She was one of Lena's closest friends, but she'd been part of our lives since the early days of our marriage. I figured if anyone would know if I was losing my mind, it would be her. Rachel and I met at a coffee shop, the kind that's loud enough to drown out serious conversations, but not so loud you can't think. I was nervous as hell, and I'm sure she could tell. What husband goes to his wife's best friend and says, "Hey, I think my wife might be cheating on me?" It felt ridiculous, but when the words finally left my mouth, the way Rachel's eyes went wide told me maybe, just maybe, I wasn't imagining things. "Daniel, are you sure?" she asked. "Okay, I get it. She's always been so devoted. She loves you and the kids. I've never seen her act this way. This just doesn't sound like her," Rachel said. Her reaction was a mix of disbelief and maybe a little denial. And I understood why. Hell, I didn't want to believe it either. But as we kept talking, I couldn't stop myself from unloading everything. About the strange nights out, the messages she'd delete, her sudden outbursts. By the time I finished, Rachel was biting her lip, looking like she'd just heard a secret no one was supposed to know. "Okay," she said finally, leaning in closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper like we were sharing some undercover mission. "I don't want to make you paranoid, but I've noticed something. She's been different lately. More distant." She stared down at her coffee, stirring it absently, as if it could provide the answers. "But if we're going to figure this out, we need proof. Real proof." That's when Rachel suggested it. The GPS tracker. My stomach did a flip just hearing it. I mean, who does that? It felt like crossing a line, like admitting my marriage was messed up beyond repair. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep living in this blind uncertainty, torturing myself with all the what-ifs. So yeah, I agreed. That night, we slipped the tracker into the glove compartment of Lena's car, hiding it where she'd never think to look. The next few weeks felt like the longest of my life. Every day, I checked the tracker app on my phone, watching those little red dots appear on the map, tracing her every move like I was some kind of detective. Let me tell you, it was exhausting. In the mornings, I'd watch her drive to work, everything normal. Nothing weird. But when the evenings came, that's when things got strange. She'd vanish, making random stops in neighborhoods, and sometimes she'd park at motels for hours. Every time I saw that red dot stop outside a motel, my stomach would drop. What the hell was she doing there? Who was she meeting? I tried to come up with explanations. Maybe she was visiting a friend, or maybe there was something that made sense. But the more I saw, and the more the pattern repeated, the fewer excuses I had left. Rachel checked in with me every few days, asking if I'd found anything. And each time, I felt sicker. I even drove by some of those places myself, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was going on. There was one day I'll never forget. I followed the tracker's route and found Lena's car parked outside this sleazy-looking motel on the outskirts of town. It was one of those places you only go if you don't have any other choice. The kind that screams desperation. I parked a few spaces down, trying to keep my distance. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold my phone steady, but I still managed to snap a few pictures of her car. I sat there for what felt like forever, staring at the entrance, hoping to see her walk out alone. But she never did. After about an hour, I left, feeling like the world's biggest idiot. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just in my head. This wasn't paranoia. Something was seriously wrong. Back home, everything felt off. I couldn't look at Lena the same way anymore. Every time she laughed or smiled, it seemed fake, like a mask she was wearing to hide what she was really up to. And she knew something was wrong with me too. How could she not? I'd get short with her over the smallest things, picking fights just to see how she'd react. But instead of easing my suspicions, it only pushed us further apart. Then one day, the tracker led me to a place that hit me hard, a restaurant we used to go to when we first started dating. I watched the red that move on my screen, my heart pounding, and sure enough, it stopped in the parking lot. I jumped in my car and sped over there, hoping to catch her in the act. But by the time I arrived, her car was gone. It was like she had vanished. I sat in that empty parking lot, feeling like the biggest fool. That night, I told Rachel everything. I don't know how much more of this I can take, I said, my voice barely a whisper over the phone. She's hiding something. I know it. You have to be strong, Rachel replied. This is going to get worse before it gets better, but you deserve to know the truth. She was right. I couldn't confront Lena yet. Not without solid proof. So, I kept going through the GPS logs, trying to piece together her movements, looking for patterns. Each time I found one of those strange locations, I'd drive over, take photos, document everything. It was like I was preparing for a trial, building a case against my own wife. I'd spend hours at night, hunched over my laptop, studying maps and logs like some deranged investigator. The more I uncovered, the closer I got to the truth. A truth I wasn't ready to face, but one that I knew was coming. There's a moment when everything in your gut screams that something's wrong, and you just know. You know that if you don't figure it out right then and there, you're only going to keep hurting yourself. That moment hit me one evening when I couldn't take any more of the GPS logs or blurry photos of motels. I had to see it for myself. I waited until Lena left that night. She had some excuse about meeting a friend for drinks, but by that point, I was tired of pretending to believe her lies. I nodded and watched her go, acting like I didn't care, like I was just another clueless husband. The second she pulled out of the driveway, I was in my car, following her at a distance, headlights off, doing my best to stay unnoticed. It didn't take long. She drove across town to this little dive bar, the kind of place where you go to drown your sorrows, not to catch up with friends. I parked a few cars away, close enough to see but far enough to stay hidden. And then I saw him. This guy, tall, mid-30s, a little scruffy, walked up to Lena like they'd been waiting for that moment all day. And the way she lit up when she saw him, I hadn't seen her smile like that in years. I watched as they hugged, holding on a little too long for comfort, before sitting at a corner table, all cozy and intimate. My whole body felt numb. There I was watching my wife, Lena, the woman I thought I knew inside and out, sitting with some guy laughing, touching his arm, leaning in like they were in on some private joke. Every laugh, every little touch felt like a punch straight to the gut. I wanted to storm in there, slap the table over, and demand to know who this guy was, what she thought she was doing, and why the hell she thought it was okay. But I couldn't move. I stayed frozen in the car, gripping the wheel so tight my fingers ached. My phone was in my hands, and I took a few pictures of them together, trying to steady the camera despite my hands shaking like a leaf. Watching this life, I thought I'd built shatter before my eyes. It didn't feel real. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. A part of me kept telling myself that maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Maybe there was some reasonable explanation. But deep down, I knew. I'd known for months. But I was finally seeing the truth with my own eyes. After an hour, they left the bar together, strolling out like they owned the place. I followed them, hoping for some clue, but they split up, going in different directions. I drove home in silence, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts, replaying every second of what I'd just seen. I couldn't keep this bottled up anymore. I had to confront her. I had to hear her side of things, whatever the lies were going to be. When she walked through the door, I was waiting for her, my heart pounding, trying to stay calm, but failing. "How was your night?" I asked, my voice tight, barely managing to sound normal. "Fine," she replied, not even looking at me as she dropped her bag on the couch and headed to the kitchen. "Who was the guy?" I asked casually, even though my insides were screaming. She froze, her back to me, and for just a moment, I thought I saw something in her eyes, guilt or maybe fear. But when she turned around, she was cool, composed. "What guy?" she asked, playing dumb like she didn't know what I meant. "Don't do this, Lena," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "I saw you with him tonight. With Ethan, or whatever his name is. I saw you." She rolled her eyes and sighed, looking at me like I was the crazy one. "Ethan is just a friend," she said, crossing her arms. "He's going through a rough patch, and we were just catching up. Honestly, Daniel, are you following me now? What the hell is wrong with you?" "What's wrong with me?" I shot back, my voice losing control. "You've been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back, and you expect me to sit here like everything's fine? I saw you were with him, Lena. That's not just a friend." She scoffed and shook her head, laughing at me like the whole thing was one big joke. Please, you're overreacting. Maybe if you weren't so controlling all the time, I wouldn't need to go out just to have a little space. And that's when it all came crashing down. The fight escalated into something ugly, something I couldn't take back. Every frustration we'd built up over the years came rushing out. And it didn't matter what the fight was about, money, the kids, work. It always came back to the same thing. I'd accuse her of cheating, and she'd twist it around to make me the villain. I was the one suffocating her, the one who didn't trust her. It was maddening. I was losing my grip on reality, caught in her web of lies where right was wrong and up was down. But no matter how much I pushed, she wouldn't admit anything. You're crazy, she'd say. You're paranoid. You're just trying to control me. She was so good at playing the victim, like she was the one under attack. And after each fight, it was like nothing had happened, like we hadn't just torn each other apart. But I couldn't pretend anymore. I knew Ethan wasn't just a friend, and I was sure there were other secrets she was hiding. So I did something I never thought I would. I hired a private investigator. I needed someone who could find out the truth, someone who could dig deeper where I couldn't, to uncover whatever Lena was keeping from me. As much as it ate me up inside to do it, I knew it was the only way to get real answers. The investigator I hired was like a throwback to the old-school detectives you see in movies. Trenskot, fik mastas, no senseatetov. He didn't sugarcoat things. He told me not to expect miracles, but he'd get me what he could. It felt wrong, like I was in some bad crime drama, hiring someone to spy on my wife. But by then, I'd crossed so many lines that one more didn't even matter. The first week was quiet. Nothing strange, no affair signs. Just the usual routines. But then the reports started rolling in. Photos, locations, times. Lena meeting up with Ethan at different bars. They'd sit too close, hold hands when they thought no one was watching. And then there were other names, guys I didn't know. Faces that made my stomach churn. The more I got, the clearer it became. Ethan wasn't the only one. My wife wasn't just having an affair. She was leading a double life. One I had no part in, one I'd been blind to for far too long. And every new piece of evidence felt like another strike to the heart of my marriage. The hardest part was acting like everything was normal, keeping it inside. Sitting across from her at dinner, watching her smile at the kids, and all I could think about was who she was meeting after they went to bed. It was like living with a stranger. Every day, the gap between us grew wider. When I hired the investigator, I thought I was ready to hear the truth. Maybe a one-time fling, or something that had gotten out of hand. But what I learned was worse than I could have imagined. Ethan was just the tip of the iceberg. It didn't take long for everything to collapse. Every few days, the investigator would send updates, photos, texts, places she'd been. The hit just kept coming. It turns out my wife wasn't just seeing one man. There were others. A guy young enough to pass for a college student, and another, older and well-dressed, like a business type. The more I dug into Lena's secret life, the more I saw how different her interactions were with each of these men. They weren't just casual encounters. They were intimate, playful, sometimes even romantic. It was as if she had become a different person entirely with each one, like she was slipping into a new mask every night. But then came the real shocker, the dating profile. The PI found her on one of those exclusive hookup apps, the kind people use when they want to keep things hidden. And what I saw there was nothing short of devastating. She wasn't even using her real name. She called herself Lorna, with photos I'd never seen before. Pictures and outfits I'd never known her to wear, taken in places I didn't recognize. Her profile description was the complete opposite of the woman I thought I married. It read like something out of a fantasy, adventurous, seeking excitement, no strings attached. That hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This was who she had become. But the PI didn't stop there. He uncovered more: private parties, secret gatherings, and then the name that made my stomach turn, Caleb. I'd met Caleb before. He was just another guy from the office, a friendly face. We'd had drinks together, grilled steaks in my backyard, laughed like nothing was wrong. But now, he was much more than that. Every Thursday night, like clockwork, Lena would meet him. And it wasn't for work. I tried reaching out to our closest friends, people who might know something, but it was like hitting a wall. Silence. No one wanted to talk, and that made everything feel even worse. It was as if everyone around me was in on this sick joke, and I was the last one to figure it out. People would avoid eye contact, dodge my questions, and all the while, Lena kept playing her role, laughing at dinner, tucking our kids in bed, acting like nothing was wrong. She seemed happier than ever, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. And it made my blood boil to watch her live so freely while I was falling apart inside. Nights were the worst. I couldn't sleep, couldn't shake the images of her out there with other men. I kept thinking about what she was doing, what she was saying to them. But I had to keep up the act, at least until I had everything I needed. I kept the PI on retainer, getting more proof. I wanted to confront her with it all. Not just Ethan, but everything. The men, the parties, the lies. The moment was coming. I was ready to tear her double life wide open. But there was one last twist I never saw coming. The phone call came at the worst possible time. I was ready to confront her, had everything lined up, photos, texts, all the proof I needed. But then the PI called, his voice grim. "Daniel," he said, "I have something else. Ethan, one of Lena's lovers, he's just been diagnosed as HIV positive." Those words hit me like a freight train. My heart dropped. All those late nights, all those lies about seeing friends, all those times she slipped into bed next to me without saying a word. Everything came crashing down in that moment. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, my hands shaking as I gripped the phone. If Ethan had HIV, what did that mean for Lena? And what did that mean for me? There was no time to process the shock. There was only time to act. I sped home, barely noticing the red lights I ran or the speed limits I broke. I had to get answers. I needed them now. When I burst through the front door, Lena was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like everything was normal. She didn't even look up when I walked in, and that alone made my blood boil. "Get in the car," I snapped, my voice barely holding it together. "We're going to the clinic." "What? What are you talking about?" She frowned, her confusion masking the panic I knew she felt inside. "Get in the damn car," I said more forcefully. She could see it in my eyes. I wasn't playing around anymore. After a tense standoff, she finally followed me outside, and I could feel her rage radiating off of her. But I didn't care. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about the truth, and I was going to drag it out into the light. The drive to the clinic was dead silent, but the tension between us was suffocating. She kept glancing at me, eyes filled with confusion and fear, but I gave nothing away. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I could feel the blood rushing to my knuckles. When we arrived, I turned to her and laid it out. "You need to take an HIV test now." I watched her carefully, looking for any sign of guilt, any flicker of panic. But all I saw was anger. "You're insane," she spat. "Why would you think I need an HIV test? You're the one who's been paranoid. You're the one with the problem, not me." I leaned in, my voice cold as ice. "Ethan has HIV. You know who I'm talking about. Now get tested." She didn't argue after that. Maybe she knew there was no point. Maybe she was scared of what the test would reveal. But when the results came back, it was exactly what I feared. She was positive, HIV positive. My wife, the woman I thought I knew, the one who had been living this double life behind my back, was exposed to a virus that could change everything. And that's when the real chaos began. She flipped. She tried to turn it all on me, accusing me of being the one who must have brought it home. She said I was making up stories to ruin her life, like I was the crazy one. It was like a switch flipped inside of her. The woman I knew was gone, replaced by someone who would say anything, do anything to avoid taking responsibility. "Maybe if you weren't so boring," she hissed at me. "Maybe if you actually cared about me, this wouldn't have happened. But no, all you do is follow me around, suffocate me. It's no wonder I wanted more." Those words cut deep, but I wasn't about to back down. I laid it all out for her, the whole truth, all of it. There was no way she could talk her way out of this one. The evidence was undeniable. The affairs, the dating profile, the messages, everything was laid bare. And as I spoke, Lena started to realize she had no way out of this. She was cornered. The anger that had been seeping from her started to fade, but what replaced it wasn't regret for me or for our kids. It was pure fear. The fear of the mess she'd created, the life she'd completely destroyed. And that's when she tried to hide it, tried to keep it from getting any worse. "Please, Daniel," she begged, grabbing my arm desperately. "We don't have to tell anyone. No one has to know. I'll get treatment. I'll take care of this. Just please don't make it worse." I could hardly look at her. "Worse?" I laughed bitterly. "You think this isn't already worse?" But hiding wasn't an option. Not anymore. I knew she had to face the truth. If she was HIV positive, the men she'd been with, the men who had wives and families, they needed to know. As terrible as it was, the truth had to come out. So, I did what I had to do. I reached out to the wives I could find, the ones who needed to hear it. I laid it out as carefully as I could, telling them that their husbands, men they loved and trusted, had been sleeping with my wife and might have been exposed. The fallout was immediate, as I expected. Lives were shattered, just like mine had been. I'll never forget one woman breaking down on the phone, thanking me for telling her, even though it was a truth that would tear her world apart. With every conversation, with every call, the weight of Lena's betrayal grew heavier. She hadn't just destroyed our family. She'd dragged others into this mess, leaving a wake of destruction wherever she'd been. The house became a war zone after that. I couldn't look at her, and she wouldn't take responsibility for a single thing. It was a never-ending cycle of denial, deflection, and blame. And I was left trying to make sense of how everything in my life had gone so wrong. You never really imagine what it's going to be like to confront the person who shatters your world. You think you know how you'll handle it, what you'll say, how you'll react. But when the time came for me to confront Lena, none of it mattered. I thought that once I had all the evidence, once I laid it all out in front of her like a prosecutor presenting a case, she'd break down. I thought she'd apologize, maybe even beg for forgiveness. But it didn't go down like that. Instead, it turned into an all-out battle. One last desperate attempt for Lena to save face. She stood there, looking at the photos, the messages, the tracker logs. I saw the color drain from her face, the lies spinning in her eyes as she searched for some new excuse. But there was no way out. "What do you have to say for yourself?" I demanded, my voice calm but filled with venom. "I know everything, Lena. All of it. You can't lie your way out of this." Fear, real fear, flashed across her face, but it only lasted a second before she switched gears. "So, this is what you've been doing? Spying on me? Following me around like some psycho? No wonder I couldn't stand being around you." Her voice was shrill, her words sharp. It was the same game: deflect, blame, turn everything around on me. "Are you seriously blaming me right now?" I shouted, feeling the rage bubble up. "After all the lies? All the cheating? You're going to stand here and act like you're the victim? What did you expect, Daniel?" she spat. "You're boring. You never listen. All you care about is work, work, work. Maybe if you'd actually paid attention to me, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere." It was like she was throwing gasoline on a fire that was already out of control. My hands shook with fury as I pointed at the evidence in front of her. "This isn't looking elsewhere, Lena. This is an entire second life. You lied to me. You lied to our kids. You destroyed everything. And you're going to stand here and say it's my fault." She paced back and forth, hands tugging at her hair, looking like a trapped animal. Then the threats came. "You want to ruin my life?" she hissed. "Fine. I'll ruin yours too. I'll take the kids, the house, everything. You'll have nothing left when I'm done with you. You think you can just walk away from this? Think again." I shot back. And in that moment, it hit me there was nothing left. There was no more love, no more respect, no more hope for her to show any remorse. All that was left between us was anger, bitterness, and a resolve to move forward without her. "You can try to take everything," I told her, "but I'm done playing your game." And just like that, it was over. No more screaming, no more pleading, just a suffocating silence, filling every room of that house we once called home. That's when Rachel stepped in. She wasn't just Lena's best friend. She became my rock through all of this. I never expected Lena's closest friend to end up being my biggest supporter. But Rachel was there for me, helping with the divorce process, organizing the legal details. She wasn't just a friend. She was a lifeline. while Lena spiraled deeper into denial and tried to cling to her old life. Rachel kept me grounded, making sure I stayed on track. The divorce process was brutal, messier than I ever imagined. Lena fought tooth and nail for everything, the house, the kids, the money. But every time she threw a punch, I was ready to counter. I knew how she operated, how she twisted everything, and I made sure my lawyer was prepared for every trick she might pull. She hated it, but deep down, she knew I had all the leverage, every piece of truth, every shred of evidence, the whole ugly story. In the end, she didn't win. Sure, there was a price to pay, but she didn't get to walk away with the life she thought she would. Slowly, the dust began to settle. The divorce was finalized, and I moved out, leaving behind a house full of memories, some good, some bad, but all stained by what I knew. I found a smaller place, something comfortable, and began rebuilding. I focused on what really mattered, my kids, my work, and myself. It wasn't easy. There were days when I woke up and just sat there, staring at the walls, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. But then I'd think about the kids, how they needed me to be strong, to not let this break me. And little by little, I found myself again. I started going out more, reconnecting with old friends, picking up hobbies I'd abandoned when I was trying so hard to be the perfect husband. It wasn't easy to look back and accept that the person I thought I loved had never been who I thought she was. But the further I moved away from the wreckage of that marriage, the clearer it became that this wasn't all bad. I had a second chance, a chance to rebuild, to find out who I was without Lena's shadow hanging over me. I met people who supported me, who reminded me what it was like to be around people who didn't lie, who didn't play mind games. And yeah, there were moments when I'd think about her, the life we were supposed to have. But I was moving on. I was letting go. And for the first time in a long time, I was finding peace.